Hello and welcome. While we wait for more participants to flow onto the platform, on screen is the ERIS content disclaimer. This webinar will be recorded and will be posted on the ERIS website in the next few days at erisinfo.com. Today's presentation will be 1 hour, 15 minutes in length. There will be time dedicated to Q&A after the formal presentation. Please enter any questions you have in the Q&A section of the platform and not in the chat section, as we may not be able to see them there. Let's get rolling. I'm Braden Ford, Director of Sales for Canada here at ERIS. ERIS, as you may know, is an environmental risk data and information services company that provides high-quality reports for environmental site assessors conducting due diligence and site assessments for real property. ERIS uses the most advanced platforms and tools to help environmental professionals review, analyze critical environmental records and historical products. As a part of our Power Suite of solutions, the latest platform, Scriva, brings ERIS project information about your site seamlessly into the report writing phase. And this can all start on site with our mobile application called ERIS Mobile. Today's webinar focuses on one of the historical products used in due diligence work, city directories. Our discussion will shed light on choosing the right city directory search for your project to improve compliance and efficiency. Of course, I can't do this alone, so we're fortunate to have with us today a panel of expert practitioners from across Canada that will discuss the regional differences that can impact city directory research for environmental due diligence. The panelists' bios and links can be found on the website, so I'll only briefly introduce them right now. From Quebec, we have Eric Denman, Vice President and Partner, D&G Enviro Group, Inc., and who also serves as a member on the CSA Technical Committee. From Ontario, we have Frisia Waxman, Senior Project Engineer from Grounded Engineering. From Alberta, we have Vic Safe, Senior Environmental Scientist and Principal at Stantec. And from BC, we have Jay Rao, Director of Environmental Services at EXP. We are also joined by our very own city directory research expert at ERIS, Jenny Hoppy. Jenny will kick things off for us and give us a quick CD 101. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Braden, and welcome everybody. As Braden said, I'm the Senior Manager here at ERIS for City Directories. I have been doing City Directories for a while, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a 101 to start out. With City Directories, we're talking about a search that is providing the detailed historic property use of information for a site and surrounding area with nationwide coverage with information dating back to the 1800s. When we're doing a City Directory search, we're helping you to meet the mandatory records review for the CSA and giving environmental information with relevant information search for the site and surrounding adjacent properties in about 5-year intervals. We're able to get this data from multiple libraries and online resources when we're doing the research. So the information I'm going to discuss with you is probably something that many of you have done yourself or have good knowledge of. This is basically just a refresher bit of information to make sure that you kind of know how we do it and to know the ERIS way specifically. Next slide. So when we're doing research and we're talking about city directories, we're talking about actual physical books, as we can see in these images. So on the top, you can see just a quick snippet of books that are on a shelf at one of our libraries. Books come in a variety of book publishers, sizes, years, and availability. Some books can be just 10 pages long, they can be hundreds, or on the bottom right, you can see that some can be thousands. When we're using a city directory, we're specifically using the street address section, which gives us commercial and residential tenants that are listed by address that we can look through. We're always adding on to our collection and growing as much as we can to make sure that we have as much relevant data for all of you to be able to utilize. Next slide. And when we talk about the process for doing a city directory, the general setup is just looking at the order and confirming that the target property that's provided is accurate and matches the mapping based on what we have there. We don't want to continue with research if it doesn't match up, if something ended up a little bit messed up on the way. And if that all looks correct, then we start with selecting our address to research. So we're looking through and we're saying, okay, here are the environmental risks. We're looking for things like gas station canopies that have a very unique look over above head. And we're looking for commercial industrial warehouses and sites that we can see right off the bat. And then we're setting a range of addresses for our research based off of that to be able to include all of that relevant adjacent and properties in the adjoining vicinity. When we're doing our research, we want to make sure that we're utilizing the relevant directories that adhering to the site that you have. We'll talk about directories themselves a little bit more, but some of them can have directories for their own city, or some are just surrounding cities for other areas or an area-wide type of books. So that comes along with the different years and various sources that we have. And then we're providing all of the coverage for that 5-year gap as we can, and then for the site itself. And then we're ensuring our accuracy while we're doing our research and just making sure we're keeping track of everything, that everything looks right. There's no weird things, red flags that kind of come up that would hinder our research. At the very end, when we've completed all of our research, we're doing one last quality check to just look for anything that might seem odd or out of place, any missing information that maybe we need to double check on before we're then sending it off and giving the best quality that we can. Next slide. Now, these are some snippets of directories, and in the left 2 images, you can see the differences in some information that we have. On the left, we have a 95 for Scarborough, and that just covers Scarborough. So those streets in the second image are a snippet from this book, and those streets will always be relevant to that city based on that title page. Whereas in the right 2 images, you can see that we have a 2000 Durham region, and that covers multiple cities and areas in that section. And this becomes important because if you look on the right-hand side, you can see that we have Major Street, and that's listed twice. And so on the top, that section is for Coburg, and on the bottom, that is for Port Perry. Both of these addresses have a similar numbering range, and there's a 360 at both of them. So when we're completing our research, we're keeping an eye on things like this, just to make sure that we're not giving you the information for Coburg if you're doing your site analysis in Port Perry and vice versa. Next slide. So some of the things that we're doing while we're researching are seen here. So in the top right, you can see 2 images. We have street name changes that take place. So we have a 1960 image for Webb Place, and then in 1955, you can see that we have an image for Icebister Place. And these are actually the same streets historically. So when we're doing our research, we're making sure that we're actively keeping an eye on these kinds of listings and still providing that data because that is the same historical information for that street. We do some confirmation by looking at the listings. So in 1960, there's a Raleigh Apartments and a YWCA that's listed at 447. And on the right side for 1955, there's still that Raleigh Apartments and that YWCA. So that confirmation of what that historical street name is there with those kind of listing matches. Another item that may happen are the 2 images on the bottom right where the address numbering may change. So in 1965, we have a listing of addresses that are in the 2000 block. And then in 1960, there are addresses in the 100 block. These are for the same site and area of information. So we can confirm this again by matching up some listings. So we've got John Hines, we've got the Vendomatic distributing, and then we've got Curtis Rose. So again, being able to just match up some multiple listings there and be sure that we're giving the relevant information because that is still the same site and area. So we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to be able to give you your information. And then one more area of information that can often pop up is in that bottom left corner. You can see that there are listings for north and east side and south and west side. So directories might split how they list their addresses out, and this is usually shown in a directional change, which means that your odd and even numbers are listed separately. In this image, the entire street is able to be taken in a very small snippet, but oftentimes you'll have columns and columns and pages of information where the split has happened. So we're just keeping an eye on things as we're doing our research and making sure that we're grabbing both sides of the street, because across the street and catty corner, those kind of areas, those are still relevant to your information and they're a part of the address range that we're looking for. So we're keeping an eye on all of those things. When we're doing our research, a one street order, can be pretty straightforward. We're going through, looking at all of these, but every time we add in streets, when we get up to 6 streets, 20 streets, 50 streets, it really adds up for a report. So those kind of things are all the things we want to make sure that we're doing our best quality on and working through. Next slide. Thank you for your time. I hope this was a good little refresher on what city directories may be and what we're able to provide here at ERIS. I hand it back to you, Braden.
Thank you, Jenny. That was a very informative overview. No questions from me at this time. Over to Eric.
Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you for attending. We'll go to the next slide, please. And show the agenda. We're going to talk about CSA Z76801, the reaffirmed version from 2022, conducting city directory searches in Quebec. And I'm going to finish with some conclusions. If I could go to the next slide, please. So these are the key elements that our Z76801 requires. An assessment, an environmental assessment, must be conducted by a competent person. It must consider certain elements, but not all elements. And the key here is that the standard does not specify the method, the extent, the level of detail, or the level of effort. So go to the next slide, please. We ask, what constitutes a competent person to conduct a phase 1 assessment? And that's generally left to the lender or the client to define. In many cases, the banks or the financial institutions have their own accreditation process for consultants, and they'll base the acceptability criteria on the basis of the competence and experience of the consultants doing the work. The CSA standard says that property use records must be consulted. And property use records consist of insurance records, property use directories, which is the topic of today's discussion, and contaminated site and property use registries. But it doesn't say you have to use all of them. The reason for the CSA standard to say this is so that if you can't capture something in one source, usually the information can be captured from another source. But this is what CSA asks for. And the level of effort pertains to what is needed here. And the judgment is a reasonable person working reasonably, exercising reasonable judgment. And again, based on the aspects of the CSA standard, we're looking at a situation where if we don't capture the information in one place, in other words, if consulted sources are insufficient and alternate sources are unavailable or insufficient, this constitutes a limitation that is specified in the report. And we move on to the next slide. So in Quebec, we have found that the best source of city directory information is the Lovell directory. And it's available on the website of the Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec, also known as the Banque. The Lovell directories are available for Montreal, Quebec City, Sherbrooke, and Gatineau. And unfortunately, the Lovell directory ceased publication in 2010. What we found is that smaller urban areas are unlikely to have a city directory, so it's almost a waste of time to try and find that. Z76801 considers insurance records, property use directories, and contaminated site and property use registries. And as we said, if the city directory information is unavailable or incomplete, The other sources are consulted, such as insurance records, contaminated site registries. And the way we found a good way to do this is, as Jenny had mentioned, we look at the street name, and we generally poll neighboring streets and look for industrial installations or industrial names. And we do this in conjunction with the fire insurance plans to see if we can pinpoint the name of a dry cleaner, a gasoline service station, or an industrial company. It relies a lot on experience because sometimes the company names don't make a lot of sense. But generally, that is the simple, straightforward way that we do the directory searches in Quebec. If we go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to make my conclusions. So Z 76801 specifies what areas to investigate, but not how to do so. The person conducting the assessment should be competent. The sources consultant should be reasonable, and the assessment should be done by a reasonable person acting reasonably. And I think, are there any more on there? Yeah, the city directories are limited in Quebec and generally cover major urban areas up to 2010. And alternate data sources must be used in the absence of sufficient city directory data. And the alternate data sources could be fire insurance plans, fire insurance reports, which are all generally consulted when they're available. Any more points there? If none of the above is judged sufficient, we put a statement of limitations in the report as required by the CSA standard. I think that covers my part of the presentation, and I'll hand it off to the next person.
Thank you, Eric. I just wanted to pause for 1 second, just as you're part of the CSA Technical Committee. Going forward, is there any plans with regards to the CSA standard in terms of updates, revisions in general, but also specific to city directories? Because when I talk to clients, or ERIS talks to clients, I should say, we get a whole host of answers in terms of how to approach city directories, specifically with regards to phase ones.
So to answer your question, the current version of Z 76801 is slated for review, but we have not established a date for doing that. So it's on the books, but not, I couldn't give you a date. And as far as the, the methodology, once again, if you do a reasonable job of trying to access the information and find the information, but can't find anything, then alternate sources are acceptable to make it still compliant with CSA.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then just one more quick comment kind of question. With regards to city directories kind of stopping in Quebec at 2010, are you not concerned with the other kind of 14, 15 years after that in terms of city directories, or does data kind of help fill those gaps?
I think that there's other resources that can be used here. The two databases for the contaminated sites registry and the registry of landfill and waste disposal sites, and that's kept pretty much up to date. The Quebec also requires that contaminated sites under certain conditions have a notice of contamination registered against the title, which will pop up in the title search. And then of course you have the aerial photographs. So doesn't worry me. It would be nice to have more information than less, but I think there are sufficient other sources that can mitigate that.
And you would never consider using like a digital directory potentially? Is it purely just going to the bank?
I don't understand what you mean by a digital directory.
There's newer city directory books, in more present time that are just available through the digitized version. So there's not an actual physical book, but there's digital directories that we can
Oh,
access
indeed.
that are more recent.
We access this all through online sources
Okay.
at the Biblioteca, the bank. But the problem is that the data only goes to 2010.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it very much. Good answers.
Pleasure.
From Ontario, over to Frisia.
Great. Thanks so much. Frecia Waxman, Senior Environmental Engineer and Team Lead with Grounded Engineering. I'm also the Vice Chair of QPCO, which is an organization of qualified persons that work together to advance issues that concern us. And it's my pleasure to be here discussing city directories from an Ontario perspective. Next slide, please. In Ontario, we have 3 different sets of standards that are typically referenced when we're talking about city directories. We have the CSA Phase 1 that is primarily used for due diligence and financing property transactions, which you just heard Eric speak about. We also have Ontario Regulation 15304, which outlines requirements for Phase 1 ESAs to support the filing of a record of site condition, or an RSC. And these Phase 1 ESAs are mandatory whenever land use is changing to more sensitive land use. So we're talking about going from commercial, say, to residential. You would need an RSC. As an added bonus, we also have Ontario Regulation 40619 that governs excess soil management and closely aligns with the RSC regulation. Anytime you dig up soil in this province, you have to think about Regulation 406 and how it applies to your project, and possibly whether or not you have to conduct an assessment of past uses, which is similar to a Phase 1 environmental site assessment and includes city directories. Next slide, please. Looking at the RSC regulation, Ontario Regulation 15304 is very specific in its wording. The standard radius search for these projects is 250 meters from the property boundary, though even that is often not enough. As you can see in the example I have here, the search radius is larger than 250 meters in some areas, because we actually have to cover any properties that are within the 250-meter nominal radius. We have to cover that entire site. So you can imagine if that search radius kind of cuts through the corner of a large industrial site, suddenly our search area has to extend to include the entire parcel of that industrial site. And this is why a 300-meter search radius is offered by ERIS for RSC site packages in Ontario. And this is to catch any of those records that fall just outside the 250-meter range. The regulation requires the QP, or the qualified person, to use all reasonably accessible data as appropriate to conduct the Phase 1 ESA. And this is why we use the radius search most often. Next slide, please. For the CSA Phase 1s, this is where we could use a smart city directory search through ERIS. These smart city directory searches, as I understand, only identify records for the Phase 1 property itself, as well as the commercially used adjacent properties. And, Eric got into what you need to do to satisfy that CSA, but the standard says the assessor shall review the records that are reasonably ascertainable. So what's practically reviewable? It means that they are provided in a manner and form that yields information relevant to the property without the need for extraordinary analysis. So this is part of the reason that the CSA standard is so often used for due diligence and property transactions, because time is of the essence. We don't have time to wait for long record searches. These transactions happen rather quickly. the Smart City Directory search should certainly meet the CSA standard, but I know that at least myself, we used to use the 10 or 20 property records that you could search through the city directories through ERIS. When we were looking at more rural areas where the property parcels are larger, it doesn't work so well when you're downtown Toronto. But now we find that we're actually still using and reverting to the radius search, regardless of whether we're doing a CSA phase one or a regulatory phase one. And this is because we find that our clients say, yes, I need a CSA phase one. And we do the report. And then as soon as their transaction closes and they've bought the property, they say, great, now I want you to do it, update it to record of site condition standards. So we try and save ourselves some time and possibly clients some money by just doing it all upfront with the search radius as opposed to the smart CD search. This I will caveat by saying that it might change if the turnaround time for those search radius city directories increases, because as I mentioned, for the transactions, time is the most important thing. So if we can gain it by doing a more focused search, we may have to do that. Next slide, please. So for assessments of past uses, this is definitely an Ontario thing. The records review component must comply with the RSC regulation 15304, except here we're only concerned about potentially contaminating activities that may affect the soil quality in the project area. So we're not looking at anything with respect to groundwater on the property. And for APUs, as they're called, if they have to be completed in accordance with the regulation, then you have to do them in accordance with as you would a record of site conditions. So we're going to be using the search radius for our city directories. But there are many assessments of past uses that are completed for more of a due diligence standpoint. So when projects are exempt from these excess soil regulations, some clients still want to do an assessment of past uses, and this is where we might use Smart City Directory search to just focus it a bit more. Next slide, please. I just want to end off by saying that city directories are important background information. We have found all kinds of things in city directories that weren't captured anywhere else, which is why they're so important. They also help form multiple lines of evidence, as Eric was speaking about before, and it helps you confirm whether a potentially contaminating activity really did occur or whether it's an error in records or, just misplaced item. Anytime that we're going to reduce the scope from a radius search down to a focused smart city directory search, we must consider whether we can justify it as a qualified person. I always like to ask myself, how would I justify the decisions I make if the file I'm working on ever ends up in a lawsuit? So that's what I like to keep in the back of my head at all times. And I think that's it, my last slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Freesia. That was a very good overview of CSA, and then in comparison with our lovely standards here in Ontario with excess soils and record of site condition. Now we have from Alberta, Vic.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Vic Safe with Stantec Consulting. I've been practicing on phase ones for probably 15, 16 years, if not longer, and by no means have I seen it all yet. I still get surprises every now and then. So next slide, please. So in Alberta, not too dissimilar to what Eric and Freesia had mentioned on how we deal with city directories, although there's no provincial requirement or regulation. However, some municipalities do have certain requirements. For example, City of Edmonton mandates for rezoning. Phase ones are required when you're changing land use type for rezoning. So city directories become quite important, especially in the developed areas of the cities. So what's the purpose of reviewing them? As mentioned before, to identify historical occupants and operations on a subject property and surrounding properties within a certain distance as part of a phase one ESA. We're looking for previous operations on the property or adjacent properties that could identify a potential risk. I find it very useful and a supplement to land title reviews. I find it's better information showing who or what was on the property rather than just who owned it. Land title review might provide private owners, business names, lots of numbered companies we've encountered. It doesn't really show you what's been on the property or who's operated on the property, but I find city directories can definitely provide some of that information. And records go back, we've seen on sites I've worked on as early as the 1900s, but as mentioned, they can go back much further than that. Next slide, please. So what are we looking for? I'm not going to go through the whole list, but many different types of operations or activities on the site or surrounding properties can definitely be a risk. The common ones: gas stations, dry cleaners. In the west, in the prairies, there's a few other select type of operations: rail yards, tanneries, some manufacturing. Nowadays, we're seeing lots of chemical facilities, fire training facilities with PFAS becoming a hot topic, waste disposal facilities, lumber yards, things like that. So many different types of operations that could lead to a risk that we're looking to identify. Next slide, please. So how do we decide on what to do? As mentioned, as Fraser mentioned, you're looking to make sure you're covering your basis, and if your report ever goes to lawsuit, did you do what you needed to do? Did you complete your own due diligence? So what do we look at when you're looking at risk? But we all know phase ones can be quite a limited budget as well. So balancing that can be a tricky thing to manage. So first thing to consider is the size of your site. Is it one parcel? Is it multiple parcels? Are you dealing with a large industrial yard, a multi-block property? The size of the surrounding properties as well. You can look at maps, historical aerial photographs, and see what's surrounding your property. Is it many lots? Is there a large development, vacant land? Using your own knowledge and experience of the area, if you're familiar with uh, when your area was developed, whether it be recently or it's the downtown. It's been developed since like the early 1900s. Um, and again, your location of your site: is it downtown? Is it the older known historical area? Is it a new developed area? Things like that. And then using that information to cross-reference with other sources of information, as was mentioned, using your ERIS database search for database checks on your site and surrounding properties, looking at previous environmental reports. Fire insurance plans are great in cross-referencing with the data that comes from city directories. It's great for confirming locations of old addresses as well. A lot of times properties have been subdivided, consolidated, so old addresses listed aren't existent anymore. So trying to find that on current maps might not be possible. So looking at fire insurance plans can help you identify locations of listed old historical records, and using that information to confirm distance of where that property is and seeing if it actually is a risk or not. And also looking at aerial photographs and seeing what's been developed around your property, or on your property. Soil types as well, the hydrogeology of the site. Is contamination, if present, able to migrate easily? Are you in a sandy, gravelly type soils area or clay soils? Around most of Alberta, we tend to deal with a lot of clay soil, so migration is a little bit less than in other jurisdictions, but something to consider. Also, your topography. Are you around a flat area versus a very strong gradient? If you're on a strong gradient, you might want to increase your distance in one direction, see what's further up gradient from your site. And then, looking at those factors when you're trying to determine your distance. I mean, typically we deal with a minimum distance of 100 meters. It can go up to 250 or long, in some cases longer than that. Next slide, please. So here's a couple examples of some larger complicated sites we've done. On the left side is a 4-block parcel for redevelopment that a client asked us to start some preliminary work on. The property consisted of 9 parcels with 13 addresses going back, I think, into the early 1900s. So it was a lot of information review there. As well on the right-hand side, another large property slated for redevelopment. This one was redeveloped, but the properties had not been consolidated into lesser single addresses. So some of the properties were old residential lots being used either vacant land or being used for one operation, but all the lots hadn't been consolidated yet. So it was 56 parcels and addresses that needed to be reviewed just for the site. And you can see in the photo surrounding properties as well, there's many different parcels, commercial, residential, some park areas. So there's a lot of information that needs to be looked at in order to mitigate your risk and make sure you're reviewing what you need to do. Next slide, please. So and other issues that we've come across. So what about sites that don't have a municipal address? How do you deal with that? We've done phase 1s on municipal roadways, light rail transit projects that are also out through municipal roadways or corridors. We've completed some phase 1s up on segments that went from 5 to 40 kilometers in length. So how do you deal with the city directories on a linear project like that? You still need to do them, and if they're available through a corridor like a municipal LRT project, you need to review what's around it to identify potential risks to construction activities. Clients want to know if they're going to find any surprises while they're developing or going into construction. On this case, we ended up having to adjust the radius, just dealing with areas where construction activities would take place or where ground disturbance actually happened. Next slide. And this is an example of one of the LRT projects, a partial segment, 5 kilometers right in the core of downtown Calgary. So as you can imagine, trying to review the city directories for 5 kilometers through downtown would be a definite huge task to look at all the information through there historically. But in this case, we were able to tailor it a little bit and managed to get through reviewing a lot of information. Next slide. And that's it for me. Pass back to Braden. Braden, you're mute.
Thank you, Vic. That was very informative from the Alberta perspective. I thought it was interesting the point you made about soil types and hydrology on site. I think especially those who don't particularly have as much experience as some folks on the call, a good point to make. And then I had one other question. So for Vic, are clients specifically asking for the Radius City Directory report, or is this just a process within Stantec where you look at the site characteristics and then determine a radius that's appropriate for a city directory search for that specific project?
In most cases, we'll be reviewing the site first when the request comes in. It's rarely client driven. It's mostly just I guess budget related, and as well as I think we've all come across it where a lot of times it's bank driven as well. It's a requirement of a property transaction. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's just a checkbox, so they're looking for it as quick and cheap as possible. So we want to make sure we're doing a good job covering all the bases. So it's more of an internal process of how we evaluate based on knowing the client and what kind of budget we might be looking at.
Perfect. Thanks again, Vic. And from BC, we have Jay. Jay, over to you.
Hello, everybody. So first of all, thanks to ERIS for organizing this webinar on this very important topic, city directory searches. Next slide, please. So a quick background on myself here. I've been practicing contaminated sites investigations for the last 23 years. I'm an approved professional. I practice in BC, Alberta, as well as Saskatchewan. And I do roughly about 150 to 200 phase ones a year, a lot of it mostly for due diligence, bank financing, plus many of them are submissions to the Ministry of Environment, BC here, and Alberta Ministry of Environment and Protected Areas, which require more detailed demonstration of all the lines of evidence that you have reviewed during your assessment. Next slide, please. So basically, my first point here is the general phase one consists of different pieces of evidence: aerial photos, city directories, fire insurance plans. You got to do interviews. You got to review maps, databases. And with databases, I want to mention specifically ERIS's this large database search that's proven to be very useful over the past several years for us to kind of pinpoint what the areas of potential environmental concern are. So historical review is basically capturing all that information. Then we go do a site visit, you understand what the current site conditions are, and then you kind of try to relate it with the historical use. You understand the development of the area, who's your surrounding, property occupants. And then the other big piece is the site registry search in British Columbia, which is right now, I think it's more than 15,000 sites captured over several years. And this registry is almost 20 plus years old. And then finally putting it all together. So it's not just an independent directory search that you rely on all the other lines of evidence to come up with your conclusions and recommendations. One of the important things here to mention is the standard of care, which is very important. So if you were not to do a city directory search, which went back, let's say back to the 60s when you were actually supposed to find something, and you only did it from the 80s to 2001 in BC, then essentially you're negligent, because if there was a dry cleaner back in the 1965 and operated for 10 years, you would have missed that. So standard of care is very important. And what that means is it's the typical level of care practiced by professionals practicing in the same area where you're practicing. And then this has been mentioned, reasonable cost. But again, you got to do a thorough investigation. And if you were to do a submission to the regulators, you got to follow the checklist and identify all the areas of potential concern and potential contaminants of concern. Next slide, please. So this document is called Technical Guidance number 10. It is a BC Ministry of Environment Climate Change Strategy document. It's a checklist for reviewing a stage one preliminary site investigation. That's what the BC Ministry calls a phase one here in British Columbia. If you were to submit it to the ministry for a regulatory instrument like an approval in principle or a determination or a certificate of compliance. This document checklist mentions city directory searches. So that's a checklist item. And it says, if available, conduct the city directory searches. Okay, so BC currently does not specify a search radius in Technical Guidance 10 checklist. However, previously, in previous versions of this guidance document, the search radius was 300 meters. And nobody was able to explain why that 300 meter, like how that number was chosen. We've asked the ministry as well. It has to do something with the plume lengths, and there's been research on hydrocarbon plumes and other plumes, and they came up with this number of 300 meters. Now it is not there anymore. And CSA Z76801, reaffirmed 2022, wants you to do the immediately surrounding properties. So city directory search is an integral part of the phase one ESA. One more thing I want to mention, for any ministry submissions, you need to provide the actual pages of the directories as an attachment. They won't just take it that you've done the search and you have some other information that you're attaching to, kind of show the properties you've searched, but you actually need the paperwork to back it up. So that's why the report gets really thick with all the appendices. Next slide, please. So the key factors that I look into when I'm doing these searches is, first of all, you need to understand the town or city where you're actually going to do the search and the site, the location of the site within that city. You have to understand the development history of the area, okay? So let's say, 1980 was the first development in that area. You don't have to go back to 1960s to look for a city directory. You may not have it. So development history of the area, so residential, commercial, industrial, etc. Usually it's highly dependent on the assessor's understanding of site history. So as you get more and more experience and you're working in a certain area mostly, so for us, for example, Vancouver, Burnaby, Surrey, New Westminster, okay, these are the areas we mostly assess. And so we have a good understanding of the site history. Where has been residential? Where has been commercial? Where do you expect to find dry cleaners? Where is the industrial zoned area? Things like that. Density of development. Now, if you have highly dense development in the area with a lot of commercial properties, then you will have multiple addresses within a short distance. For example, New Westminster, very tight area. You've got so many addresses that you need to look through. And it has a long history. Okay, it's more than 75 to 100 years. Likewise for Vancouver, very long history. Some of the city directories for Vancouver are in microfiche form. You got to actually go and look at the microfiche to see what's going on. The next important consideration is the hydrogeology of the area. Again, it is, are you going to assess up gradient sites more closely, cross gradient sites or down gradient sites? Obviously, if your site is 100 meters down gradient, you're damn sure that the slope is quite steep, in that particular direction. You're not going to sit assessing in detail what's happening at down gradient areas. So the focus should be mainly on inferred up gradient areas as well as immediately surrounding properties. And it's up to the assessor to determine how far to go because there's no real radius prescribed. The other thing is the focus on the city directory searches is also developed in conjunction with the other lines of evidence, fire insurance plans. Okay, if you see in a fire insurance plan, there's been a gas station, a few properties away, and you got to focus on the city directory search to see if that is showing up in the city directory search as well, because that's called multiple lines of evidence approach. So every line of evidence is saying the same story. Aerial photographs, you can see the canopy, BC site registry, you could see the site registered. So if there's 4 lines of evidence, all of them saying the same thing, then you're fairly confident that that was there, and that's an area of potential concern. The other thing is the report should generally show a map showing the addresses of interest which were searched so that we don't miss certain addresses. And then the standard of care, I have worked in companies where they used to do directory searches every year, but these were large MSAs with big corporations and who are, who could be sued left, right, and center, these gas station companies. So, but the general standard of care is every 5 years, you got to review the directories. Okay, that's the general standard of care. If you go every 3 years, you're going at a higher level of care. Okay. And then the last one is check if streets or addresses changed over time, because you could miss the address. And we've had some situations where the address is a different street and things like that. You got to watch out. And, Old Yale Road in Surrey, for example, okay, King George Boulevard, Old Yale Road. They have different names over the years. So those are the main factors. Next slide, please. Now, the focus also is on the type of activity. So BC Contaminated Sites Regulation has a list of activities that they consider potentially contaminating. And, Alberta has not a schedule, but it has a list of activities. Examples are dry cleaners, gas stations, auto repair shops, machine shops, metal plating operations, and then all kinds of industrial uses, sawmills, wood preservers, works yards, storing de-icing salts. That's a big thing in BC. I think also in Ontario. Chemical manufacturing, etc. So you got to focus on these kind of activities, and the names kind of trigger what kind of activities may have occurred, and then you need to look further into detail. Next slide, please. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much. Back to Braden.
Thanks, Jay. Just on the topic again of radius versus smart CDs. For EXP and BC, it sounds like the smart CD, covers your needs when it comes to most of the phase 1 work that you are doing. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. As I said, almost 75% of the assessments that we do are mostly due diligence, bank financing related. So somebody's buying the property, somebody's refinancing the property. And in that, the level of care is always there, but we have a good understanding of the area in particular. So the search that you provide us, and we have customized it through ERIS, and that's working extremely well for us, and it gives us everything. And one more thing I want to mention is your ERIS gives us all the site registry detailed reports for one price, and that's priceless. You give it at one price, but that's priceless because A lot of people flag these offsite gas stations or other properties that are now vacant, and they've already received a COC. But unless you go and spend $75 to get a detailed report, you actually don't know if it's got a more details about that property. So that getting that site registry information all in one search, combined with our city directories, combined with other databases, that helps us a lot. So I highly recommend going for that full database search. And that's been an important, search result for us to kind of find any issues. And this has worked extremely well at smaller towns with industrial use, okay, where you don't have city directories. So that's what I want to say about the searches. But city directories, definitely, we've got a customized city directory search package for us for our general assessments.
Appreciate that, Jay, and happy to hear everything's working out well for you folks in BC, especially. Thank you again, Jay. And we're going to turn it back to Jenny just to touch on ERIS's city directory offerings a little bit.
Hello again. As you have heard over the past hour or so, everybody has different reasonings and different requirements for what they're choosing. So I just want to quickly go over a couple of the products that we're able to provide on what you need. And it's all about choosing the right city directory for what you need. So we'll start with a 250-meter radius. So we understand in some instances, obviously that is the case of what is needing to be required for what standard you're trying to meet. And when we are providing a 250-meter, we are giving anything and everything, as it says. So every single property that is touching that, we're going through and we're adding it. So you can see in this image, there is a circle around the pinpoint for the target, and we're going off of that. This order ended up having 22 streets in it, and this is certainly not the most dense urban area that I'm sure some of you have seen some of those radius reports come to, but we're looking through and we're setting it up. When we're talking about radius reports, we're talking about amounts of data and the amount of time that it is taking on all ends. So sorting through that data, you can have upwards of 300 plus pages of information when you're sorting through that. And it is taking anywhere from 10 to 12 hours or plus sometimes, depending on when you're in those more dense areas. And that includes setup, doing the research, and kind of just combing through and doing that quality check at the end, all of that stuff. And you might hear that and say, okay, well, 10 to 12 hours doesn't sound that long in the scheme of how much research we want to do and how many reports you're doing and we're trying to get out. It does add up. And so that's why that turnaround time for the radius reports ends up being weeks instead of just a couple of days, because we need to make sure that the researchers are able to comb through and do all of their due diligence on what they're putting in, doing all that research of street names change, address change, all those things, along with getting out other stuff that is a little bit less than the 250 radiuses. It's not a requirement for the CSA. So again, just wanted to touch base on that with what we're doing and just making sure that we're giving the right information and the time on your end that it comes through, whether it's you or your team members of sorting through that data and making sure that if that's how much information you're getting, that it's actually required and what you need to complete your research and get what you need. Next slide. And then we have the Smart CD that a couple of people have touched on as well. So this is an offering that we have at ERIS where we are going through and we are choosing the relevant properties. So when we're doing this, there are a lot of different components that come into this. But first and foremost, we're starting out with your target and your site, whether that's one address, multiple addresses. We're going through and we're looking for those risks again. We're starting out with what is currently there, looking for those gas station canopies. We're looking for big commercial areas. They had a great list of things that we're looking for when we're looking at a map and we're opening up the directories and kind of starting out with what we have. We're looking not only at the, directly adjacent properties, but also in the vicinity of the area. So there might be a site that is a couple of streets away that kind of has a weird boundary line with where the site is, things like that. So when we're choosing properties, we're kind of looking at a big picture of what seems to be in the area would be a really big risk, what types of properties they are currently, what they might have been historically. And we're doing that while we do the research, not only while we set it up, but while we're kind of doing our reports themselves. We're trying to provide you with very specific data so that the time on your end is definitely spent combing through stuff that is important and you find it relevant. Oftentimes it's 100 or less pages in those dense urban areas, and the total time with setup and actual completion is only 2 to 3 hours. So that comparison of that 12-hour report to a 3-hour report definitely makes a pretty big difference with what we're able to provide, and then the time it would take on your end. And then it meets or exceeds the CSA requirement that we're trying to hit with those standards. And as I kind of touched on, the how and what we're doing is we're using the current and the historical. So when we have aerials, when we have fire insurance plans, all those things, we're kind of looking at those as we're working through it, using the resources that we have available, using the directories themselves. And if a street name pops up where there wasn't a cross street before, we're opening the book and kind of turning to that page, seeing if that was something that existed in the middle. And then we're making adjustments while we're researching, because we're starting with what we have. And then as we go through the books, I have found areas where it's near a river, and the area that the client was searching was very largely developmentally changed in the early 2000s. So not that long ago in the scheme of things. And what was historically relevant to the south was a large paper mill that existed on a street that was about 6 or 7 streets away, but the way that the street ended at the river was just a weird kind of setup. So making sure that we're looking out for those kind of areas and including that is what we're able to do on the Smart CD. So when we're choosing those properties, those are all the things that we're looking at and keeping an eye on. Airports are another one where if your site was maybe historically an airport and it's not anymore, that's been one that we've had. That address for that airports are large, so it was probably on a street that was decently far away. So we're looking at that, making sure we're including those kind of things and just growing with ourselves. With the Smart CD, we always want to make sure that if you have information that you're able to provide, because maybe you've already done a few things or you've done the site before, 100%, please make sure that you're including that in your notes when you're putting your order in. We're giving you up those 5 streets, and in those commercial areas, if we see 8 streets that we know are going to be relevant and you need that data, we're then going to you and saying, hey, this is what we think needs to happen. This could be a custom. Do you want us to make sure that we do this? Do you only need the 5 streets that we chose? And kind of working with you on that. So this product is a little bit more of a dynamic offering that we're able to give, and the researchers are able to kind of take their time and go through it. The research on all of our products is unique, but it's all about the forefront and how we're able to provide you what you need instead of you having to look through all your information and then come back and say, oh, this was a street that existed internally and we didn't order this first. Now we need to add that on. And it kind of helps prevent that later loss of time as well. Next slide, please. So this is all I have on city directories and our products here at ERIS. It was wonderful to chat with you. And if you have anything specific that you would like to provide, here's my information, and I'll hand it back to Braden. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. That was very informative. We're now going to turn to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Again, just want to extend a great thank you to all the panelists today. Jenny, I think I'm just going to start with you because there was a few specific to just the processes internally. So again, just to clarify for Smart CD, you mentioned adjacent and adjoining. So you guys are looking at the area. So for example, if our office is on an industrial lot that is not very large. So if you're looking at a subject site, then a small parcel to the north of that property across the street, and then beyond that, there's a large manufacturing facility. You would include that listing for that larger manufacturing facility as well, correct?
Yes, indeed. We want to make sure that we're kind of grabbing that and we're noticing that as well, because we know that that's relevant to you. So those are things that we're keeping an eye on. It's not a direct boundary lines or anything like that. It is kind of a gray area on how we're able to include it to make sure that we're getting that kind of jump across the street and a parcel.
Perfect. And then a good question here, and one I don't think we covered. If I did miss it, my apologies. But is ERIS staff trained to track street name changes when doing city directory research?
Certainly, and that is on any and all research that we're doing. So we are training all of our staff to always look for what we call red flags. So if you're working on 3 streets in a downtown area and your major street was historically no longer there, but everything else is listed, it's what we call a red flag, usually a street name change. So they're trained to go and look for cross streets, look at the aerials, confirm whether or not it was actually there. And then we continue to provide that research as a part of the research, because that street is the same street, even if it historically had a different name.
Awesome. There might be 1 or 2 more that I posed to you, but I just kind of want to give everybody on the panel an opportunity here. So one of the first questions we got during the webinar was, what radius would you use for a city directory search on a linear project like light rail or described or road right-of-ways? So, I mean, Vic, did you want to touch on that first? And then, I mean, if there is anybody else that wants to comment or provide an answer, we can go in order.
Sure. Again, it's probably not a set distance unless it's required by the client. But in our cases that we've done, it involves some research of where your line segment is going. A lot of times they're mainly through residential corridors. So historically, that we might not get a lot of information on the city directories. But the odd time we might extend the coverage to include some commercial properties. It can range. I think the smallest one in certain sections might have been like 50 or 75 meters. But then, we might not be able to get for a longer segment going to 150, 200 meters. It would just be way too many properties. So you kind of have to do some research and customize it and tailor it to your project. So it can vary, but we're again also trying to balance making sure you're capturing as much information as you need to. But yeah, it could be closer within residential corridors and then expanding it for commercial or known older segments. In a couple we've done, they go from downtown right to the outskirts of town where the part of the corridor is going to be back to the 1900s, and in the outskirts, are just newly developed over the past 10 years. So it can vary depending on your project or your segment.
Thanks, Vic. I mean, Jay, Eric, or Frisia, anything to add in terms of kind of how larger infrastructure projects will be approached from kind of the CD radius perspective? Just want to give everybody an opportunity.
Yeah, I can go first maybe. Large searches generally tend to, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. Okay, so it gives you so many properties that you need to go through so carefully. Going back again, you need to understand the history along that corridor, and then you need to narrow down low risk, moderate risk, and high risk areas. And when I say high risk, I mean intense commercial activities or any light industrial activities. So you got to categorize the risk in different areas and try to narrow down your scope. But at the same time, even if you call some area low risk, you need to sample, and you have that facility with ERIS where you can pick the properties that you want the directory search on. And you pick those properties, and to verify that what you are classifying as low risk is indeed low risk. So you got to do that basic, what is that called? Reasonable due diligence by a reasonable person. And that's the test of, whether it's low, moderate, or high. High, we know that is high. But moderate and low, you got to, for example, moderate, you got to add a few more properties to make sure what you're calling moderate is truly moderate. So it's that level of, you got to use your judgment before you kind of come up with a search. A search program for city directories.
Yeah, I would
Thanks.
just add that in Ontario, a lot of times the infrastructure projects still specify they want an ONE phase 1. And so then your hands are pretty tied and you still have to have that large search radius. Different municipalities, though, may have less stringent requirements. So then you would have more leniency to make some decisions.
I don't have anything more to add. It's a complex one.
Fair enough. Just moving on here, just trying to respect the time as well. Okay, so I've got kind of a few questions here. I mean, I'll just read this first one and then kind of expand on it as well. As Eric mentioned, in Quebec, the directories are easily accessible. How is it in other provinces? Is it generally easy to go through ERIS? And then just kind of to add, we had another question that was similar. I work in Quebec, or sorry, I work in Manitoba, but curious to know what coverage varies significantly versus cities like Vancouver when compared to Toronto. So, I mean, Jenny, did you want to maybe take the lead on that? And then, of course, we can open it up to the panelists as well.
Of course, I can start with what ERIS has, and then, as you all have experience with your isolated areas, it definitely helps. So some areas are specific to the libraries that are just in their area. So we go through the libraries that we have, and we even have libraries in the United States that have Canada directories that we're able to adhere and grab information from. So it depends on the area, certainly. We do have a pretty vast collection of what we're able to access, and a lot of that has just been from collation of data. So I can't speak to how easy it is because it depends on where we've grabbed it. So for somebody just kind of going in, it might be a little bit harder because we were able to grab information as a whole, but from 2 or 3 different libraries that spanned across even countries, let alone provinces or different states that are here. So as far as access outside of ERIS, it might be a little bit harder, which I can let the panelists speak to. But for ERIS itself, we have a pretty solid collection of information, especially for the much more, urban downtown areas that we're able to give information for.
I'll just kind of follow in order here. Eric, anything to add?
No, not much. I feel like I'm running down ERIS. It's just that we find that what we can get from the bank is really readily available and pretty comprehensive.
Perfect. Vic?
I can more speak to Edmonton, which is where I'm based out of. We've got city directories available at our Edmonton Public Library. There's a City of Edmonton Archives that has a good portfolio. There's also a provincial archives that covers some directories for some of the smaller municipalities. So we've got options. There are lots of information available, but then it does switch to a cost-efficient perspective as well. So sending staff out to do the research on that versus using ERIS for the most part, we got to balance that depending on how complicated the site is and whatnot. So, we historically, before some of these pricing options were available, would have to send staff out to do that. But I think more and more we've switched to ERIS to do a lot of the city directory reviews.
Frisia, and then Jay, you can wrap up.
Yeah, I echo what Vic said. It's been a long time since I've gone and done it myself, and I don't think that it is cost effective to do it yourself. It is possible, but ERIS is the much more affordable, and your staff will, I think, like you a little bit better. ERIS. So.
Well said. Hey, Jay.
Yeah, so I've gone myself in the early 2000s to the libraries. I've stood in a line where people are photocopying city directories. All consultants used to come there. I've spent hours and hours trying to, see how much time and money we spend to get the information, photocopy it, things like that. So going straight to ERIS, getting the search, picking what you need, okay, letting somebody else do it for you. And now we get copies of all those sheets as part of the package of all the city directory sheets, and that's been very helpful. So essentially, we are relying on ERIS to provide us the information now.
Thanks, Jay. We're kind of getting up against it here in terms of time, so I just want to be mindful of the panelists as well as the attendees. So maybe we'll address 1 or 2 more here and then start wrapping up. I mean, this is a good one for Jenny and just the industry as a whole. So we've received a few city directories that only listed businesses but not mention any residential listings. It would be nice to see properties that were residential as well. So we have that as a backup for calling area residential. And then it said, could you please let us know how we could receive these listings? Is there a comment that we can leave in the order form or the order record? So Jenny, can you just maybe talk about how we kind of address residential listings in terms of what we're reporting in a city directory?
Certainly. So that's kind of been a growing thing that we've been working on here at ERIS on the Canada side of things, just with how we've been doing it versus how we're trying to do it. So 100%, if you know that you need the residential listings and you want those, leaving a comment can always help because we read those notes and we're making sure that we're doing that with including the information. We're going through, and if residential is what is there, then we're trying to provide that specifically for the smart CD and then just for regular searches as well. So that is something we're kind of working on changing, where we have like an all residential and making sure that we give the information and just kind of growing with what we have. And sometimes it is just the book listing as well. You know, there might have been some residentials for some areas and they didn't include the names, or it was a very predominantly industrial kind of area and maybe one got left out or something. Human error in creating the book is always something that we deal with as well with our research. So we're not specifically leaving residential out on purpose when we do that. It is more just kind of how we're collating the data. But if you feel like something is missing, definitely add a note or send an email and we'll look into it.
Awesome. And just one final one, it kind of expands on the original question. We have also received CDs where a property was developed in the 1970s, but the earliest city directory ERIS provides was in the 2000s. Is there a reason for why when this happens?
That is a result of the publishers. So unfortunately, if you are in a smaller city that is close to a big city, most likely your city is covered in the larger city and it doesn't actually have city directories for that city itself that are specific to the books. They can, but oftentimes they're just included in the canvassing area of the bigger books, and that coverage area drops off pretty rapidly in the 2000s. So that means they weren't actually canvassing those other areas until about the 2000s, where the publishers decided, oh, we should probably include all of these areas as they do exist and we want to give the information on them. So it is just a matter of the canvassing area of the sources. So what's included in the street address directory is oftentimes in the older books that city, and they have very strict kind of street guidelines of what was downtown and that area, and that is what they include. And even the rural areas of the city itself don't seem to be covered all the way back. So it's just a matter of the publishers and how they decided to collate their data with what we're able to use.
Perfect. Thanks, Jenny. And we got time for one more. I want to kind of go around to the panelists once more just before we wrap up. This is actually a pretty interesting question, at least for me anyways. And I've never heard really any answers to this, so I'll be interested to see what folks have to say. But do any of the panelists know of any lawsuits that were caused or resolved by city directory searches? Asking in general without the names being involved, of course. So let's go in reverse order this time. We'll start with Jay, then we'll go to Frisia, Vic, and Eric to finish.
Okay, none. In my last 20 years, I have not come across any specific lawsuit where city directory search results were the only main cause for the lawsuit, because it's not just if you have all your limitations identified in the report, and if you've done reasonable searches to get the history of the site and understanding of the site, then the chances of lawsuits are minimized. It's very rare, and I can tell you one instance, dry cleaners. You could miss a dry cleaner and actually it doesn't show up anywhere and you could still have dry cleaning contamination. So one way to end your phase one is to say that it could be risk-based compliant. It doesn't mean that every contaminant is going to meet a numerical standard. So BC has, the numerical, what's a risk-based standard is if nobody's drinking the water, nobody's getting affected, it's risk-based language, no exposure pathways. So then you're risk-based compliance. So if you use that kind of language in the conclusions, then there's a fair chance that you won't get sued, because what you're saying is you can't have just maybe iron exceeding a drinking water standard and somebody suing you saying, oh, you didn't tell me that there could be iron here from XYZ. So there are certain ways to write these phase ones. And but to answer your question, I haven't come across any in the last 24 years.
Thanks, Jay. And yeah, we're just about 1 minute left or so. So if we can keep them fairly concise, that would be appreciated. Frisia.
Not for city directories. Phase ones carry a lot of legal risk. And I've seen people ignore things or write them off inappropriately, but not for city directories themselves.
Okay.
Similar. I have heard of one lawsuit that was from a miss on a city directory. Nothing resolved. I don't know if that lawsuit was successful or not, but yeah, I have heard of it. I believe it does happen. So yeah.
Thanks, Vic. Eric.
I would concur with, particularly with Frisia. I'm not aware of any lawsuits arising from something being missed in the directory search. In our jurisdiction or our area, it's more related to the presence of oil tanks and underground oil tanks and that get missed a lot.
Thanks, Eric. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today's presentation. To read more about environmental due diligence, please visit ERIS's info hub at erisinfo.com, which contains curated articles, podcasts, and past webinars on the topic. Please note this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the ERIS website in the next few days. On behalf of ERIS and our audience, I would like to give a big thank you to our incredible panelists, Jay, Vic, Frisia, Eric, and Jenny, for sharing their wealth and knowledge and experience with us today. And to our audience, we want to thank you for your attention during this past hour or so. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you from ERIS.
Thank you.